All right, thank you, Dave. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Every time I spoke to Dave this morning, he said, could you just cut a little bit more off of what you're going to talk about? So I had an utterly inspiring introduction based on what everyone said. I'm not going to do that. But I am going to talk a little bit this morning about and try and do justice to electrons, materials, people, and money. Primarily around the energy system, which is what fascinates me, but it underpins society so much. It underpins our life expectancy, our quality of life, our industry, our potential. So it's super important. And we live in an increasingly virtual world, but it's entirely and utterly dependent on the physical. The movement of electrons is through materials. The materials and products we produce and rely on moving physical stuff all over the world, and building lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of infrastructure. Just look at the discussions we've had this morning about buildings, transport, all of that kind of stuff. So in the production and processing materials and goods, we've become so excellent at this that the achievement is entirely underappreciated, utterly underappreciated. The economic efficiency and scale is never realized by the end user until it breaks. COVID and the war in Ukraine taught us that very, very quickly. So when it breaks, we do understand that reliance and the amounts we're relying on. And we know our way of life all has cost to bear. We are changing the makeup of our atmosphere at a high pace. We are refining billions of tons of products and processes a year and creating highly concentrated waste piles. We're massively increasing the amount of human-made stuff in the world all the time. But on average, there's never been a better time to be alive, and we have tools and ideas to address many of these challenges over time. To talk to these challenges in a bit more detail, I'm going to talk a little bit about the UK energy system and the way that I look at it as an engineer, as a materials scientist, and to the point Julia was making about systems. It's all about systems and people, how we interact with them. So I pulled this graph off Our World in Data. If anyone here doesn't use Our World in Data, I can highly recommend it. This is a fundamentally awesome resource. In Korea generated 12% more nuclear electricity per person in 2024 than in Britain anyone used in electricity in total. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful, but it's quite a thing to get your head around. And you're kind of going, right, I find this astonishing. Has a developed country reduced energy and electricity generation in the way, say, we have per capita in recent decades? And what does this mean? Is there or will there be such a thing as a low-energy, prosperous country? I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a really interesting question as we go on our kind of journey. So to talk to that in a bit more detail, let's go through the UK energy system. So this graph shows primary energy consumption. So that's all the energy we use, not just electricity. So transport, heating, industrial process, that kind of stuff. The non-blue sections are fossil fuels, so burning oil, gas, coal, but it includes electricity generation from those fuels. The blue stuff covers primary electricity generation, so nuclear and renewables mainly. And as we increasingly electrify, we are more and more dependent on steady, reliable supply of electricity. So going forward in the future, which I hope the text is quite good, big, you can see that we increasingly rely on electricity directly. Some key points to think about with this that I always like to do is stuff that burns is inherently easy for us to store at scale. It is very easy to store this stuff. Electricity is very hard to store at scale. It is more challenging than storing fossil fuels, and it's much more efficient for us to use it at time of generation. However, moving the supply of electricity generation in both time and space is where it costs money, and we have losses associated with it. So you've got to be willing and understanding of that as you kind of design your future system. And I think we kind of generally think too much about energy as just capacity, and rather more about the value of when it's generated and how, and that really has to come into our thoughts. Just on that, you can see the little blip to the left. That was the miners' strike. So that's how much, for those of you who remember that in the UK in the 80s, probably not as many as I thought in the audience. Awkward. That was a massive societal upheaval. And look at the dip you get on that graph, right? Look at what we're trying to do with electricity. It is huge. This is a huge transformation. The best energy system in any country is defined by our resources, our geographical position. You know, what have we got in terms of resources, wind and sun, and also what outcomes we want to achieve, such as reliability, security, cost, industrial competitiveness, etc., growth. What I think this really means is managing the following. It means managing people, public support, the politics around it, the engagement with people, the skills that we need, the jobs that are created, the sense of ownership that we create in people of what we call, say, our energy system or our industry. It really needs money. Financing, the cost of capital, the investor community, their ownership of it, that's all fundamentally important too. You can't do that without money. And materials. The hardware per unit of energy that we have, the critical materials we rely on, geopolitics of those materials, the human and environmental concerns associated with them should all come into play. Designing and delivering energy systems to sensible criteria and outcomes is bloody complex, even without considering the necessary requirement to predict future demand. And we know prediction is difficult, especially when it's about the future. So let's talk about demand briefly. Whilst future demand is hard to predict, a significant increase in electricity demand is likely in most views. China leads the way, and their electricity percentage of final energy consumption is 30%. They overtook the US and European Union 10 years ago, with flatlined in the low 20s. We're not increasing the amount of electricity, which is our primary consumption. However, things are changing. Electric vehicle sales are rising. Global electric car sales increased by 25% in 2024 compared to the previous year. Home heating and cooking will likely increasingly electrify. What will we need for our industries, current and new, and the role of hydrogen in the UK? And data centers and AI demand has already been significantly underestimated. So couple of quick examples on this because I think it's important. Google consumed 32 terawatt hours of electricity in 2024. That's more than a month of our annual electricity consumption in the UK. Meta data center campus was proposed this year, 5 gigawatts. That's slightly under 1.5 Sizewell Cs. It's monstrous. It's absolutely monstrous. There are significant uncertainties around this, Joe, right? The level of growth. In 2024, the UK Compute Roadmap said we'll need 1.8 gigawatts of stuff to supply data centers. In 2025, that changed to between 5.1 and 8.5 gigawatts. It's not a criticism, it's just bloody hard to predict. So these are the kind of things that you're trying to think about. So prediction is difficult, and perhaps even so with AI. Supply. Let's have a quick look at supply. So I love this graph, and I spent a long time putting this together. So electricity supply generation in the last 50 years was dominated by fossil fuels and nuclear. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the increasing impact of renewables, biomass, and imports coming into that. And we kind of thinking about, this is the NESO electrical engagement forecast for 2024. This kind of shows what the future might look like. And there are a lot of scenarios out there, right? So a few key points from this. A substantial change in the volume of electricity generated will be weather dependent. That's the green and yellowish stuff up there. A substantial portion of this generation will also be asynchronous. Oh, I'm pleased I said that successfully. That's quite good. And basically, not big, heavy spinning things running at 3,000 RPM. So maintaining frequency, maintaining the stability of the grid becomes a thing to solve. How do we do that? A substantial portion of this electricity generation also will be offshored. It won't be physically on UK land. There will be stuff offshore. There will be connections we rely on. There will be boats coming in. So those are things to think about. And I think the impact that nuclear, the industry I currently work for, has on this, the blue stuff, is quite substantial as part of a diverse energy mix. That's a really key thing. I'd also note here the limited impact you see in terms of final energy in terawatt hours of gas-powered generation, storage, and hydrogen generation. That's the kind of the red and the purpley stuff up there. They're not to say they're not important, but that's a lot of hardware we're building to be used a small amount of the time, and that needs to be considered as you're doing system design. They require a large amount of hardware. So I love graphs, sorry. I've got lots of graphs. I think looking forward at what this means in terms of the scale of the system is super important when it comes to an engineering challenge, which it is. It's a fundamental engineering challenge. So in this graph, the blue is our annual demand in terawatt hours. So this last year was, or a year or two ago, I need to update this now, was about 280 terawatt hours. Orange is the size of the system that you need to supply it in gigawatts. And the green is the peak demand at any one time in gigawatts during the course of that year. So that's kind of telling you, what does my system look like and what do I get from it? So 280 terawatt hours last year or year before. I needed about 100, just over 100 gigawatt system to do that, and a 50 kind of ish gigawatt max. If I follow CP 2030, which has got great aspirations, I'm adding another 100 gigawatts of stuff on top of that in a very short space of time to provide not actually any more annual demand. So I'm changing the system fundamentally. If I go to 2035, I'm adding another 100 gigawatts on top of that again to service an increase to 400 terawatt hours. And if I go to 2050, if I've electrified everything I want to, heating, transport, and we've got this great system going on, which would be really inspirational, I've got about 400 gigawatts of stuff knocking around to provide 600 or 700 terawatt hours. That's generating capacity, transmission and batteries not included. So you'll have to purchase those separately. To get to CP20, it's about 5,000 kilometers of transmission line potentially to connect that stuff up. It's a massive challenge. To get to the 2030, you're talking about 17 to 20 gigawatts of stuff a year you're trying to add. This is not to belittle the ambition, which I think is great, but in the last few years, in the last few decades, the most we ever added was 5 to 6 gigawatts, and last year was 3. So you kind of get an idea of, well, that's quite a big increase. And everything people are talking about this morning is super important. Skills, people, materials, procurement, how we engage with stuff. I'll say a few more things on this, and because Dave's going to start staring at me soon, and you all want to get to a break. The rate of build also also matters, right? I can build solar a lot quicker than wind, a lot quicker than nuclear. I can build transmission line. I need to work that out because I haven't really done it properly for a long time. So I've got to work out how fast that's going to be, and can I get the transformers on time? Can I get the materials on time? Can I push it through? Carbon capture and storage and hydrogen for power unproven at scale. What does that look like? What is that going to come through when I try and build it? And the amount of hardware I've got per unit of energy is massively increasing. So at the moment, for every gigawatt of stuff, I get about 2.5 terawatt hours. In 2030, I'll get 1.5 from 1 gigawatt. So I'm putting much more hardware into the system. The amount of risk ultimately will lead to a cost that we need to determine, and competition for hardware, critical materials and skills is high and driving up prices and lead times. So materials, let's talk briefly about that. Building an energy system, as I've said, is an exercise in material extraction, processing, movement and deployment at a gargantuan scale. There's one challenge in being able to procure and deploy enough material for any plans at affordable prices. Another is managing the source of those products and implications for the environment and humans and political security. So this is just one graph I pulled off of the International Energy Agency report on critical materials, which I'd encourage everyone to look at. And it shows an area of domination by one country in particular in terms of China in the refinement of refined material production. It's not the only example of this. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think it's you've got to consider this. You've got to consider where your materials have come from, what you're happy to rely on, and what the implications are of sourcing those materials, especially when the consequences of those production can be very much removed from sight. The waste from these processes, the impact of tailings ponds and the amount of toxic and radioactive waste in them, or the way that the materials are produced, such as solar panels that's been debated recently in the House, this is really important. We have decisions to make, and we should be curious about where our materials and where our goods come from and what we're happy to do in those deployments. And there may be compromises that we need to make in our plans because of those, and that's something I feel very passionate about. Right. So quickly back to the energy system and the trilemma, and I am going to cut some stuff here, Dave, don't worry. So I think we have a bit of an odd approach to energy system design. We tend to talk about the focus on what the generating technologies are that we want, like renewables versus nuclear. We even have YouGov polls that ask people what their preferred generation technology is. I mean, what is the point of that? I want electricity, when I turn the plug on. That's what I want. I don't care where it comes from as long as I can afford it and it's reliable. And if you want, I mean, there's a whole world out there of techno-economic models that you can find to underpin system design. It's a massive industry. And at this point, I will refer anyone who wants to Escape from Model Land by Erica Thompson. It's a fantastic book. And the quote from that, taking a model literally is not taking a model seriously. So as you look at models and say, oh, that's true, just go and have a read of that. I believe energy system design has got much more complicated. It was usually around energy security and resilience. I've got loads of text on that. It's really increasing in complexity due to interconnection and what we're relying on and how our system is resilient. Just look at the Iberian Peninsula blackout for evidence of what playing around with these things means. Clean and safe, I think, is relatively understandable, but also more complex. But efficient and affordable fair, that's where system design really comes in. We have to start thinking about full system costs. It should include transmission, constraint, curtailment, export losses, storage costs, losses, and other systems such as grid stability. And I've got a bit of an example. In November 2024, we had a lull, just a week long. That caused a 2 terawatt-hour drop in supply from wind and solar that we had to balance. If you wanted to fulfill that gap with, say, battery storage, you wouldn't. It's insane. It will cost you £500 billion. It is not what batteries do. It is not what they're there for. They are there for other great things, but system design matters, and putting it into simple technologies is just doing a disservice to the public debate we need to have. What we also need to think about, and this ties in with everything everyone said this morning, is a positive impact on jobs, tax, and growth. What value are we creating from our projects? We have to think about the amount of infrastructure and the intrusion that it brings and the community and benefit. Fundamentally, people generally don't like pylons. You've got to have a very good argument why they're going through where you live, and we want to build a lot more. That's a real challenge, and community engagement really matters about you're doing it right. And I've already mentioned engineering, delivery, and operational risk. Loads of hardware, super complex systems to run. The IT system we need to install, smart meter interaction, everything is going to be fundamentally different to what we have today. I probably should say a few words about Sizewell C whilst I'm here, since they actually employ me and pay my salary. Sizewell C is, for those of you who don't know, is a power station we're building on the East Coast. It's going to be big. We had our final investment decision, and I'm very proud to work for Sizewell C because I think it's a new way of delivering our energy assets, and for the UK, it's a critical part of our energy system as part of a diverse mix. It's a replica design, so our learning from the James Stewart report on HS2, we know that this matters greatly, and we've got to stick to that. In the mid-2030s, it will provide 7% of our annual electricity, regardless of the weather, from a small, energy-dense, highly protected site, and it will likely be generating well into the next century if we look after it. So what an asset to leave for our children. It will use around 5 million tonnes of concrete and 300,000 tonnes of steel, yet it has one of the lowest material uses per unit of energy produced. So it's good value for money when it comes to hardware or component materials. Seriously, I joined it this year. The community engagement and nature restoration being done there, and this ties into what we talked about earlier, is exemplary. It's absolutely fantastic, and I'm so impressed with the work that's been done for more than a decade. We only just got the final investment decision. We've been doing this for more than a decade. That's how long these things take. If we talk about productivity, we might want to reflect on that. It will come online as our demands have increased, as I've said. It will be part owned by us and also recycle funds back to us. And we are reshoring a valuable skill set that we've been creating through Hinkley Point C, creating over 70,000 jobs, and we'll aim to deliver the project with over 70% UK content. I think that's a fantastic achievement, and I would like to keep doing better every time we go on to the next project and keep scaling up. Further education is absolutely key. Andy mentioned that earlier. We're building a college on the coast. The region we're building in, the kids need jobs. They need good jobs. Their transport is crap. They can't get into further education. It's 2 bus journeys to get to Ipswich. They don't do it. We're building a college. We're going to try and coordinate with other people. And we're also improving the roads, and we're building a train line, and we're trying to get permission to build a train station for the city of Leiston to use, the village of Leiston. So we're trying to do all the things that a good project should do to be part of that energy system. So I think energy represents one of the biggest engineering and science challenges humanity has faced if we want to do the changes that we're talking about. The amount of hardware we need to get enough affordable and abundant electrons to demand is bloody high. Critical materials are a growing geopolitical tension point. God, who wrote this? And a reliable supply will continue to be a challenge for us, decades-long challenge. And people matter and money matters. If you forget that in what you're doing, if you forget the people engagement, you're toast. Absolute toast. But there's a lot people here can do, and I've got a little list, but it's not exhaustive. Critical material alliance and optimization, reclaiming critical materials from current use, I think that's going to be massive. Innovation, new technology, scaling that technology up, turning it into a business, be fundamental. Research and development and international collaboration, design optimization, construction material optimization. How do we get them? Can we use them more efficiently? Construction and infrastructure delivery, engineering risk and delivery. The list goes on. So very quick canter through quite a lot of stuff. Anyone wants to catch me during the break for questions, please do so. Thank you very much.